Where is Josh Riibe's passport? A chaotic scene inside a Dominican courthouse for the man last seen with missing U.S. college student Sudiksha Konanki. The judge ruled that Riibe no longer needs to be under police supervision in the DR, but Riibe's lawyers say his passport was confiscated, and Dominican lawyers say they don't know where it is. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. What a mess, a legal mess. Not only is it unclear where Sudiksha Konanki is or what happened to her, the man she was reportedly last seen with on the beach doesn't have his passport, and it's unclear when he will get it back. Now, before we get to the latest on the story we've been following out of the Caribbean, I do want to bring you up to speed on a new project we're working on here at Law and Crime. It's a new YouTube channel called Scandal. It's all about exposing the dark side of Hollywood, and if you can guess by the name, we're going to be covering the disturbing and most outrageous stories that happen in Hollywood behind closed doors. Now, if this sounds like something you're interested in, head to the link in the description of this video and subscribe to our new channel and stay up to date on all the scandals. Now let's get back to this story. This was the scene yesterday as Josh Riibe, his dad, and his attorneys made their way into a courtroom in the Dominican Republic. This video courtesy Dominican media outlet El Nuevo Diario. Riibe claims that he was under police supervision and confined to his room as authorities searched for Sudiksha Konanki, and he says his passport was confiscated by authorities as well. Riibe is not charged with a crime, and Dominican authorities have called him a witness in the missing persons case of Sudiksha Konanki. The 20-year-old University of Pittsburgh student vanished after she and Riibe went for a swim in the early morning hours of March 6th. Now, we'll rehash more of Riibe's version of events in a little bit, but let's get back to what happened in court, where Dominican authorities painted a very different version of events than what Riibe's attorneys have been arguing. They claim that Riibe was not confined to his hotel and was not being held in custody. They said he is a witness and has not been accused of a crime. The judge sided with Riibe, saying he can no longer be under police supervision. But when it comes to his passport, things get a little more complicated. Riibe says authorities took it. According to CNN, Dominican authorities still have it. When he could get it back, that's unclear. A prosecutor told NBC News outside the hearing that he, quote, doesn't know about the passport. And the judge said that his courtroom yesterday was not the place to decide what happens related to that document. Riibe has another court hearing set for March 28th, which is 9 days from now, but it's unclear if he'll be at that hearing or if he will find a way out of the country. His attorneys tell CNN they're working on getting a new passport. While Riibe finds himself not only in the middle of an international search for a missing person, he also finds himself in the middle of this legal mess in the Dominican Republic. But back in the United States, the family of the girl that he was last seen with, as of yesterday, they say they are just looking for closure.
Just with deep sadness and heavy.
Just emotional video from outside Sudiksha's home, just outside of Washington, D.C. This is per WTTG TV. Her parents spoke to media yesterday, calling for Dominican authorities to declare their daughter dead. Just think about how difficult a decision it is to not only come to that conclusion, but then publicly have to go out and talk to cameras and explain your reason why you want authorities to make that decision. This week, they also sent this letter. It was first obtained by Fox News to Dominican investigators, reading, quote, following an extensive search, Dominican authorities have concluded that Sudiksha is believed to have drowned. Her clothes were discovered on a beach near where she was last seen. The individual last seen with her is cooperating with the investigation, and no evidence of foul play has been found. Given these circumstances, and after much deliberation, we request that the police department proceed with the legal declaration of her death. We understand that certain legal procedures must be followed and are prepared to comply with any necessary formalities or documentation. Initiating this process will allow our family to begin the grieving process and address matters related to her absence. While no declaration can truly ease our grief, we trust that this step will bring some closure and enable us to honor her memory. Riibe took the stand yesterday at his hearing and said that he had met with Sudiksha's family, and her mom thanked him for trying to save her daughter. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office also issued a statement saying they no longer consider Riibe a person of interest in her disappearance. They emailed me a statement statement saying, quote, "It's an ongoing investigation, but in that regard, he is not a person of interest anymore in that he's been interviewed as part of the case. It's still not a criminal investigation in any way from our perspective. He is not considered a suspect by us," end quote. According to CBS News, on the stand yesterday, Riibe said, quote, "I really want to go home and see my family. I understand I'm here to help, but it's been 10 days. I want to turn to a Morgan & Morgan legal alert. Emerging reports reveal that hair color products may not come with clear warnings about potential health risks. So if you or someone you know who frequently handles hair color chemicals have been diagnosed with bladder cancer or other types of cancers, Morgan & Morgan is here to fight on your behalf. You can scan this QR code on your screen or go to forthepeople.com/hair to start your claim today. Riibe is originally from Iowa, and he's a student at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota. He met Sudiksha the night she went missing. The two are seen on this surveillance video per Dominican media outlet Noticias SIN heading to the beach with friends at 4:15 in the morning on March 6th. And you can see Riibe's arm around Sudiksha. And while their friends are seen returning to the hotel at 5:55 a.m., Riibe and Konanki stayed behind. Riibe said the two kissed in the water and were hit by a big wave and brought back to sea. Riibe told investigators that he tried to save Sudiksha by dragging her back to the shore, swimming to safety, and in his version of events, Sudiksha walked off once they were in knee-deep water and he never saw her again. He claims to have thrown up from drinking so much seawater during the rescue and didn't see her when he looked up. He's next seen on surveillance video returning to the hotel alone at 9:55 a.m. That's after he says he fell asleep on a beach chair only to be woken up by the brightness of the sun and the bites of mosquitoes. From there, it's been an international mystery about what happened to Sudiksha Konanki. There have never been reports of foul play, and Riibe has never been accused of a crime, even though Dominican authorities have reportedly claimed Riibe's story to be inconsistent. These are images of a cover-up found on a beach chair believed to belong to Sudiksha per Dominican media outlet CDN. Her sandals were also found, and that raises doubts if she ever made it back to shore. Interpol, the international police agency, put out a missing persons notice for the 20-year-old, a sign of the international traction that this story has had beyond the Caribbean nation. Riibe has continued to cooperate with authorities. He's been seen at the beach with investigators multiple times, and the Dominican Attorney General even interviewed Riibe for 6 hours, according to ABC News. And according to a leaked transcript of an interview Riibe gave authorities that included dozens of questions, his lawyers reportedly advised him not to answer multiple questions. Investigators asked, quote, "How can we verify what you said is true?" And Riibe responded, "My lawyers advised me not to answer that question and I will rely on them." He used that answer several more times in that interview to questions like, "What do you think about the disappearance? Did you know the young woman? Do you remember if the young woman made any gestures or screamed while in the sea? Did you report to the authorities or the hotel what happened with you and the girl on the beach? Did you tell your friend what happened with you and the girl on the beach?" All to which the report says Riibe answered, quote, "My lawyers advised me not to answer that question and I will rely on them." The report said investigators told Riibe it was his right not to answer questions. He had 2 lawyers with him for that interview. Now, people in Riibe's hometown in Iowa have stood by him. The local sheriff posted this letter that was signed by Riibe family friends in support of him this week. And in the days following his name coming to light in this story, a neighbor said that they would bet their life that he had nothing to do with Sudiksha's disappearance. And while Riibe is in the Dominican Republic, he continues to stay at the Rio Republica, which is where he arrived for spring break before March 6th and where Konanki was staying as well. Konanki was a junior at the University of Pittsburgh. She planned to study pre-med in the spring when she returned from spring break with the hopes of one day working in a career in medicine. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Kesia Early. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here on Law and Crime. What do you make of what we saw play out in this Dominican courtroom yesterday?
A lot of chaos. It's not organized as you would think that a U.S. courtroom would be. the rules of procedures, how this quote suspect slash witness slash person of interest is being treated. His position is that they're treating him like a suspect. They're detaining him. They're not allowing him to leave. They're watching his every move, even when he eats. And then the opposing position is, no, we are just making sure he's safe, but we're not detaining him. And obviously, that is far from the truth. But then also, there was a question about his passport and the whereabouts of his passport so he can leave. It's been almost 11 days that he has been held, even after she was presumed dead. And there's a question as to whether or not his passport was either seized or if he voluntarily gave it up and they cannot find it. So there was a lot of questions and a lot of unanswered responses to and from the court regarding where he stands as a suspect or a person of interest.
Well, because that's, the person of interest line came from a sheriff's office here in the US, and at least the line that Dominican authorities have been giving is that he is a witness to a missing persons case. At the same time, they have interviewed him multiple times. The Attorney General for the Dominican Republic reportedly interviewed him for 6 hours. That to me does not sound like someone that you would just have as a witness in a missing persons case. What more do you think Dominican authorities are doing here? Why are they being so robust with Josh Riibe?
Well, because he was the last person that was seen with her alive, right? And we know that there were circumstances that appears to be possibly foul play that was later ruled that it was not. We know that both Mr. Riibe and the victim in this case were intoxicated, and intoxication and water is not a good mix. In this case, there was reports that they were kissing in waist-high water, and then a tide came and kind of took them both underwater. But here's where the issue comes in is that he had previous experience as a lifeguard. He allegedly rescued her the first time, but then he took in water and he had to help himself and just assumed that she was okay. She grabbed her stuff and left. I believe that they was investigated him deeply because of some of the inconsistencies in his statements and that they had no other suspects or no other leads. So they wanted to make sure possibly before this blossomed into him being a suspect and placing him under arrest. What, if any, culpability did he have in her death, of which she is presumed to be dead? So I think the issue is, was it truly a case of him rescuing her and thinking everything was okay, or was there foul play? Did she resist his advances and did he kill her? We don't know, and I think that that's where the issue comes in at.
Right, because as much as there's been no evidence of foul play. He's never been considered a suspect, but he does tell this story, a very dramatic rescue that took place in the water that you would have to be a really skilled swimmer to be able to rescue someone like that. But then they find her clothes, and there's really no evidence that she ever made it back to shore. So you have that part of the story that you can definitely be suspicious of. But then you see this court hearing that plays out. And yesterday, just hearing the Dominican prosecutors argue almost like a different reality from what I think most people would agree with in just believing that he was being confined to his room. How common is it, and I know you're not an expert in Dominican law, but to see those types of arguments made in courtrooms in this type of hearing?
Well, we know it's a different structure, right? The United States is bound by the Constitution that you're innocent until proven guilty, and every accused is entitled to due process, as opposed to having their rights constrained and not being able to move. In this case, we see that he is really being treated as a suspect, and the prosecutors are saying things differently. The real question is, is he free to leave? And if so, where's his passport so that he can leave this country? He has been maintaining his innocence. And he has been cooperating, although, as you can see, there's some inconsistencies. But the question is, are those inconsistencies enough to hold him? You also have to know that he was intoxicated, heavily intoxicated, to the point where after he left the water, he passed out for a few hours and then
Right.
he left the beach. So are these inconsistencies tied with his intoxication, which in the United States is not a defense to any crime? Or is it tied to him trying to evade law enforcement? And did he have any involvement in her disappearance? But again, I don't think they have enough to the point where her parents even hugged him, thanked him for saving her life the first time. So clearly they believe that she was drowning the first time, and maybe her intoxication led to her death, where she thought that she was leaving the shore and ended up being taken back in with the tide. So there's so many unanswered questions. And I do believe ultimately they will let him go. They're going to find that missing passport if you believe that it's missing, or they may be buying time to hopefully find her body. And if they see signs of force, then they have enough to hold him. So I believe that they do have his passport. It's my opinion that maybe they're holding on to it until if and when her body does show up and there's signs of, let's say, strangulation or defense wounds, that may be a sign of attack, that may be a sign of struggle, and that may be sufficient evidence for them to hold him longer.
And it felt like, too, coming out of this court hearing yesterday, is a bit of a catch-22, because on one hand, you have the judge saying that he can no longer be held under police supervision, but at the same time, we don't know where his passport is. Apparently, he voluntarily gave it to authorities, but then yesterday, the authorities, prosecutors at least, were saying that they don't know where it is, and the judge said that that hearing wasn't the venue to talk about it. What does If you had to guess, his next court hearing is March 28th. What does the next several days look like for Josh Riibe?
Well, he does have additional ways to obtain a passport. I mean, look, people lose their passports all the time. If you go on a cruise, if you go out of the country, this is where the U.S. Embassy, maybe his attorney in the U.S., can apply for a duplicate passport. So that's really not a main issue. So if the authorities are saying that they don't have his passport, if I'm his attorney, I'm looking for alternative resources to get a duplicate passport to get him out of there, especially if they're saying that he's not being held against his will, or he's no longer a person of interest, he's no longer even a suspect or considered a suspect. Then go to alternate routes into securing another passport to get him out of there. I mean, he's made it very clear he wants his life back, but I'm gonna tell you something, it's going to be very hard. His face, his video, that video of him walking back shirtless, barefoot, has been plastered all over the media. It's going to be a long process. And this is the issue when you're dealing with someone who is considered a person of interest, but society and a court of public opinion looks at you as you had some involvement, especially if this case is never solved. So he has a lot to deal with. But the first course of business is, if they're maintaining that they don't have his passport, there's alternative routes to get it.
Yeah, and the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, which she lived outside Washington, D.C., was the one that coined the term person of interest in this case. And it was related to a missing person investigation. But to your point with the court of public opinion, when you hear person of interest, it just ramps up the attention. It certainly did in this case, though the Sheriff's Office yesterday said that they don't consider him that anymore. You do have this statement from her family, who came forward and said they don't believe he had anything to do with it as far as foul play is concerned. They want her death to be declared by Dominican authorities. What impact could that have on the legal process that's now playing out in the Dominican Republic?
A huge impact, because normally the family of the victims drive an investigation, they drive the prosecution, they have to get authority or the victims' families consent to sometimes plea negotiations. So if you're having the family, the parents of the victim in this case, saying, we believe him so much so that we want you to declare her dead, so close into the investigation, or presume that she's missing, it shows that there may be a possibility that this case will be closed. Her death will not be ruled as a homicide, possibly a accidental drowning. And when you look at all of the circumstances in this case, when you're dealing with a decomposing body, or a body, normally after it's the decomposition, it's buoyant, it will float. So if they have not found her body, and you're talking about over 300 searchers who have been searching, a rescue team who has been searching for her body and haven't found no sign, no evidence, it could be possible that her body was taken out to the vast sea and may never be found. And I just think that this is the way that the family can have closure and begin to heal from this tragic event.
And I don't know if they would want to take this approach, or even if they could, but I think of this resort, which has said they've fully cooperated with the authorities. This was an all-inclusive resort where you go and you have access to as much alcohol as you want 24 hours a day. But you look at it and you say that no one really stopped these individuals from going to the beach at 4:15 in the morning after they had clearly been, throwing up. Surveillance video shows them at the bar, clearly very intoxicated. I feel like in the United States, if that would be some grounds that someone would try to file a lawsuit. What's the reality of that when you're dealing with the Dominican Republic or one of these all-inclusive resorts that you know what you sign up for in the Caribbean?
Yeah, it depends on the laws of the particular state, but typically if you're dealing with at a bar and the bartender sees that you're clearly intoxicated, the liability will then shift if they continue to serve you. But in this case, just as you stated, you're talking about an all-inclusive resort. I'm pretty sure there were multiple bars, so it makes it even harder for the bartender to know whether or not or how many drinks you had, especially if after she threw up, she went to another bartender and got a separate drink without that bartender's previous knowledge of her intoxication. And also, like you said, it's an all-inclusive resort. So I think that liability is going to be hard to attach. She went on her own free will. And I just think that this is just a tragic situation. And the all-inclusive resort, the bartenders, the bar should not be held liable for this tragedy.
Yeah, and I think it probably speaks to, when you think of the differences in laws, all-inclusive resorts don't really exist in the United States the way they do in other countries, probably for, you're the attorney, I'm not, but from a liability standpoint, this is probably an example why. Just lastly, I think of Josh Riibe, if he is telling the truth and he really was just trying to be cooperative in the beginning, hands over his passport to authorities, he's in a foreign country but wants to help in any way he can. And now he's in this legal limbo. The criminal defense attorney, for people watching this story, what is your advice when it comes to certainly wanting to help people, but then at the same time, and then you see this hearing yesterday where the version of events from prosecutors, where it feels like they're really trying to turn things around on them. From a criminal defense attorney's standpoint, what's your advice to somebody when it comes to handling these types of cases?
From the onset, even if you're innocent, it's best to remain silent. It's your Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say and do can and will be used against you in the court of law. And even if you think that you're assisting the investigation, it's best to go with an attorney, because we will advise and guide you on what to say, how to say it, because again, we are protecting your best interests. Oftentimes, people who have no involvement want to help, but then they talk themselves into an arrest or into a detainment, as you see in this case. But I think the issue with his case is, if this was truly a dramatic rescue from her drowning, you mentioned nothing about it after you regained your consciousness from your hangover to no
Yeah.
one. So I think that's where it smells kind of fishy. Like, wait a minute, you said that you helped her from drowning, but you tell no one, you don't ask about her whereabouts, you just assume that she made it home safe. So I think that's what the public has an issue with, that he didn't say anything until he was considered a suspect. But unfortunately, again, there's not sufficient evidence to hold him. And I think the Dominican Republic and the USC's that they have to eventually let him go.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. Interesting now that you think of the State Department being involved in terms of getting his passport back, how quick that process could play out. There are no charges. The family seems to have even thanked him for attempting to save their daughter. Just a real tragic story all around that I know in the beginning, many people were hoping for a happy ending in some way. Kesia Early, criminal defense attorney, thank you for taking the time to be with us here on Law and Crime. This is a really important story that we've been following.
Thanks for having me.
Josh Riibe is due back in court on March 28th. It is unclear whether he will be there or still in the country at the time of that hearing. We'll continue to follow this story. For On the Case presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.